Here's today's First Word Daily Devotion.
As we come to our reading today on January the 24th, we're going to be confronted right away with the past. And it's important for us to understand the past unless we lose our place in the narrative. Look at what happens in Genesis 41. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed a dream. We're going to focus on Genesis 41 through 42 because this section of the Bible is probably one of the most beloved and well-known. Indeed, it's one of the most fascinating pieces in all of the history of the writings of the world. But remember the story so far. Remember, God made a promise to Abraham that he was going to give him descendants as numerous as the sands of the sea and the stars in the sky. Abraham had one son of promise. The son was Isaac. And Isaac, of course, had 2 sons. Isaac had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. And now, Jacob, remember, he had 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. And from Rachel, who was the woman that he loved the most, who his affection was toward the most, she had 2 sons. Remember their names? Their names were Joseph and Benjamin. But listen to what happened on our January the 20th reading, back in Genesis chapter 35. Here's what we have. Verse 17. And when her labor was at its hardest, this is Rachel, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for you have another son." And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Benjamin, or Benoni, for his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephraim, that is, to Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over their tomb. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. And so here we are there. So here we have this wonderful story today confronting us of of Jacob's son, Joseph. Joseph is going to be put into a place of prominence. Remember, he was just thrown into prison, and there we learned that the Lord was with him. And the reason all these details matter is understanding our place in the narrative, and as these details unfold, help us to appreciate the story even more. So let's see. Pharaoh, after 2 years, back to our January the 24th reading. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed a dream. And look at verse 7. Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And then look at what the rest of verse 8 says. But there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. So he was troubled. It says in verse 8, he calls out for all of his magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. Pharaoh told him his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them. And then all of a sudden, the chief cupbearer remembers. He remembers his offense today. He remembers that he had forgotten Joseph. Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, verse 14. And then look at verse 15. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have had a dream. There is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said to you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." But look at how Joseph answers. Joseph answers and says, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." And then look at verse 25. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. And then look at verse 28, again emphasizing God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. And as a result of this, the proposal in verse 37 pleased Pharaoh and all of his servants. Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God, or the Spirit of the gods?" Pharaoh's not necessarily a believer at this point. And so Pharaoh sets Joseph over the whole land of Egypt. Now look at verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old. And then look how God blesses Joseph. Verse 50. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my hardship in my father's house." The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Now let's continue the story. All the earth came to Egypt, to Joseph, to buy grain because the famine was severe over all the earth. And then 10 of Joseph's brothers come, Joseph's brother with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the officers who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. So in that verse tells us here in chapter 42 and verse 4 that Jacob didn't send the youngest son, Benjamin. The reason is because he was afraid that something would happen to him. And Joseph, we have this wonderful exchange that you can read, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Joseph's brothers come and bow themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. And then look at verse 18. Don't miss this as you're reading. On the third day, Joseph said to them. And then let's flip over ahead really quickly just to point out these details so that you can read them yourself. At verse 28, at this time their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" And then look at the reason we pay attention to these details is because of what we have in verse 36. Jacob their father said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you would take Benjamin." Look at verse 38. "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left." What a fantastic story. Pay attention to the details of the Bible. It's in the details that we understand the whole story.